Welcome to the 37th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. Today we're going to be doing a full breakdown of UFC Fight Night, Cory Sandhagen versus TJ Dillashaw. After that, we're going to look forward to next week's fight card. There isn't any news to talk about that happened in MMA in the last week, so we won't be touching on that. We'll be skipping that section of the podcast. So we're going to start right off here at the main event of TJ Dillashaw versus Cory Sandhagen. And we're going to start it off by talking about the judges and how this fight was scored. After that, I'm going to talk about the performance, what I liked, what I disliked from each guy. And then we're going to end it off by talking about the future for both Cory and TJ. So like I said, starting it off right at the controversial point. We're going to start it right off. I scored this fight 3-2 Cory Sandhagen, but that's a crucial word in this sentence, but I completely understand a 3-2 Dillashaw scorecard, and I think that's a very reasonable score, and I think that this fight is being called a robbery. First of all, the word robbery is an overused term in MMA that we're seeing a lot now, but I think this is being seen as more of a robbery than it actually is, just because there were two other big time messed up decisions that were robberies. I think that Miranda Maverick won the fight against Macy Barber. That's pretty popular opinion. And I think that Kyler Phillips should have had a draw in his fight. I think he should have had a 10-8 first round, and that should have led to a draw. So I think when you have those two decisions first, I think that makes the third one, in the most important fight, I think that kind of makes the fan reaction blown out of proportion because it wasn't the first questionable call that we saw that night. But the reason that I scored this fight 3-2 Cory was because in rounds 4 and 5, let me start with this. I think that rounds 1 and 3 are very clear for TJ, and round 2 is very clear for Cory. So obviously TJ's got a advantage going into the 4th and 5th round. He's up 2 very clear rounds. And then in rounds 4 and 5, both very close rounds. So when I'm talking about why I scored the fight this way, I'm really just referencing rounds 4 and 5 because I had both of those for Cory. Now, I scored these rounds for Cory because ultimately I valued the striking damage that he did a lot more than I valued the control and grappling of Dillashaw. And that is something that I usually don't do. I usually am very high and very generous when it comes to scoring position and certainly cage control. But I just think that in this fight, we were seeing TJ walk Cory down and just walking in to Cory's strikes. I mean, that's an oversimplification of this fight entirely, yes. But I think where we just are in a position where TJ is walking forward, Cory's evading most of the strikes that are coming at him. I think the only strike that TJ was really hitting at a high percentage was those leg kicks, and those were effective. So that's not to demean his performance, but I think that was really the most effective thing he did in the striking. And then we have Cory, who was landing a lot of big shots and was landing a lot of shots that were doing damage to Dillashaw. So I've been valuing that over the control time where we see TJ shoot for a takedown, push Cory up against the fence, and then hold Cory up against the fence for 15 to 30 seconds with ultimately doing very little damage. And when TJ was able to secure a takedown, usually what we saw was Cory pop right back up within 10 seconds of hitting the ground, and then, TJ would push him up against the fence again and would be in the same position. Now, that was a good game plan from TJ. That was a great game plan, and it won him the fight. But when it comes to scoring that, I score those to the two comparisons of how those rounds went, the pressure and control, and then the striking. I just value the striking more, and that's my opinion. And if someone disagrees with me, ultimately, that's the problem with MMA judging, is that you can have the disagree, and ultimately neither person is wrong, but you still got to score the fight for one or the other. Both guys either way are going to be in a position where many people thought they won, but they're walking away with the loss. And that's just the nature of judging, when you have to factor in, the number one thing is effective striking, but how much did the control and pressure of TJ outweigh the effective striking? It's a conversation to have, and I don't think that's a conversation for one person sitting doing a podcast should give, just because I feel like that's a discussion where you should bring in many people's viewpoints, and I feel like that's more of a roundtable discussion that needs to be had than just a single person giving his opinion. That I just feel like that would not be the right way to solve this issue. But like I said, ultimately a very close fight that could be scored 3-2 for Cory or TJ. I had it Cory, understand why people had it TJ, and I understand why people and the judges had it for TJ. And like I said earlier as well, I just think the frustration is starting to boil over on the judging, and especially when there were two other questionable calls before that. Ultimately, it boils into, Cory got robbed when he didn't get robbed, and it was a very close fight. Moving on. We're going to talk about TJ's performance. I was very impressed. Even though I had Sandhagen winning this fight, what TJ did was very, very impressive. The first thing that I loved from TJ is he came in with the right game plan. Anytime a fighter comes in with the right game plan, it makes them 100 times harder to beat. TJ came in with a great game plan. Leg kicks, pressure, pushing Cory up against the fence. Those are all great ways to defeat Cory with the skills that TJ has. I think the best way to beat Cory is the way that Aljamain Sterling did. However, not many people can do that the way Eljo did that, just because of how high level of a grappler Eljo is. But with the skills that TJ had, he went in there and performed, the absolutely perfect performance to win that fight. And he overcame a lot of adversity as well. He still showed, the same heart he had before. Whenever, at the end of the first round, his knee popped, and at the end of the second round, he had the big cut. Now, Cory caused both of those. Let's not get that confused. It's not like either of these were freak incidents. One was because of a massive hook that Cory landed in a perfect spot. The other because of a leg lock Cory had and wrenched on it and got the knee to pop. Both of those, credits to Cory. And, a lot of fighters, however, aren't able to come back the way TJ did. They let that knee affect them too much. They shy away from throwing kicks. I mean, after the round one was probably the least amount of kicks we saw from TJ. Kicks only sped up and increased as we got later in that fight. So TJ really started to kick more after the injury to the knee. A lot of guys don't do that. A lot of guys don't start kicking more when they win the first round without the kicks. They would have just said, hey, I won the first round, no kicks. Now my knee's hurt. We'll just keep the same game plan. He was able to adjust and take on a better game plan while overcoming an injury. And then anytime you're in there with the high-level striker like Cory Sandhagen and you've got blood blocking your vision and you're still able to compete at a high level and win that fight, very, very impressive for him to overcome that. The other thing that I was very impressed with from TJ was simply, you were out for 2.5 years. How do we look in a return? The questions for any fighter in a return are cardio, chin, speed, all of those things, heart, things like that. All of those things were tested, and they were tested at a high level. The heart with the injuries, the cardio, 5 rounds. Both Sandhagen and Dillashaw didn't look very tired after the 5-round war they had just had. The speed was evidently still there. The footwork still there. The chin still there. I mean, Sandhagen landed a flying knee. He landed a spinning back fist. I think he landed a spinning elbow that was pretty good. He landed several big hooks. TJ got knocked down once, but in all considerations, his chin held up very well. A lot of people in the bantamweight division don't last 5 rounds with Cory Sandhagen. That's just the nature of the game. So I was very impressed by that. the signs of aging and ring rust were just simply not there. And that just makes the bantamweight even scarier of a division now that we know TJ is performing at a high level at that division. Moving on to Sandhagen, this is going to seem like I'm being more critical of Sandhagen because I do have some points that I think he should have, some things he should have done, you know? I think he should have, turned up the pressure a little bit more in rounds 4 and 5. Those ultimately were two very, very close rounds. And I think there were instances where he was able to touch Cory, but he ended up just bop, 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 and then boom, that's it. Ultimately, I think when he lands the initial, spray of shots, I think he needs to keep going. I think he needs to stay in his face, a little bit more forward pressure, a couple more body shots. And if he can throw in another flurry in each round, maybe 2 flurries in each round at the end of a nice combo, I think that could have won him the fight. And that's all retrospect, That's something that is very hard to do when you're in the midst of that fight, especially when you're fighting someone as high caliber as TJ Dillashaw. But Cory, if you saw his Instagram post, Cory Sandhagen agreed with me. This wasn't something that Sandhagen, is saying that didn't happen. He said he needed to be a little bit aggressive in spots and made some mistakes. So, that was no secret there. I also would have liked to see Cory mix in some kicks. With the long limbs that Cory has, a couple more kicks, I think, would have been, beneficial. But at the same time, TJ did catch some of them and turn those into takedowns. So maybe I'm off on this one. But I would have liked to see a couple more kicks because I think that diversity in striking makes Cory Sandhagen a lot harder to beat. But, I could be wrong on that. I'm not too bullish on that. Now, let's stop critiquing Cory Sandhagen because he still performed very well. At the end of the day, he went in there and did the one thing that every fighter tries to do. He went in there, he got hit, and didn't get hit. I mean, he got kicked in the leg, but in terms of just throwing punches, if you're just looking at the punching exchanges, he was hitting TJ and was not getting hit nearly as often. He's dodging, returning, textbook stuff, and, as simple as you can make it sound with hitting and not getting hit, it's a lot more complicated than that, and Cory Sandhagen was able to go in there and do that. And he also landed some very big bombs. He landed some shots. He landed some shots that put a lot of guys away, like I said earlier, and to be able to do that on someone like TJ Dillashaw, very impressive, simple as that. Last thing here, he caused the cut and he caused the injury of TJ. Those are two things that I don't, if he wins this fight, that knee and that cut, would have been two things that really helped him do it. But he wasn't, ultimately, he didn't get the win. But those two things were still there, and they were two crucial things, two crucial roles, two crucial factors of that fight that Cory caused on to TJ that almost helped him get a win. So, overall, tremendous performance by TJ and Cory. Now, what is next for TJ Dillashaw? TJ, he's got to fight for a title next. He has said he was willing to fight Rob Font if it's going to take those two, Aljo and Petr Yan being those two. If it takes them too long to rematch, then TJ Dillashaw said he would fight another opponent. That just seems silly to me. Two things we saw in that fight: knee, cut, right? We've talked about it before. Let those heal. If you're coming in with something that can get cut open against Petr Yan, it's probably going to get cut open. If you've got a bad leg against Aljo, it's going to be a lot harder to stop a takedown. That's just the nature of the game. And I don't want to see him fight Rob Font injured. I don't want to see him fight, I don't want to see him get put in a position where he's got a title fight now regardless. By going in there against Rob, even if he wins, say he wins and gets injured and the timetables aren't adding up, it's just not worth the risk. He's got the title, take the title. It's just not worth it. And then, another, I guess this is kind of a piece of news. so I didn't add it in the news section because I wanted to touch on it here. But it's looking like Jan versus Sterling is going to happen in October. So that'll give some more clarity on this bantamweight division because we've got the next title contender. We've got the next title fight. Let's get some of this stuff squared away. We can get this division back to normal because right now it's so difficult when you have the asterisks next to Petr Yan as a champion in many people's eyes. And, you've got the Yan rematch looming. And then what's next for Cory Sandhagen? It's got to be Rob Font here. I think that's the number one clear option. Both these two are two guys who everyone recognizes as top guys in the division. However, they're not getting a title shot next regardless. Pair them up against each other. Winner gets a title shot after TJ. I think it's as simple as that. And if something happens, TJ wants to fight Rob Font, I'm looking at the winner of Jose Aldo and Pedro Munhoz. I just think that the winner of that is going to prove that they're high level in this division. And that they're going to move back up these 135-pound rankings. Because right now, they are, let me get you their exact ranking, but Aldo's 4, and Frankie Edgar is 7, Pedro Munhoz is 8, but that 8 is coming off some very impressive performances. So I think that the winner of this is going to jump right into that conversation and is going to jump into that tier of Font and Sandhagen for who is the next best in the division if you were making a tier list right now based off the landscape. Clear cut, they would be the clear cut number 4, maybe the number 3, depending on who wins and how. And then that would leave you another gap to where you see the likes of Cody Garbrandt, Marlon Rice, Frankie Edgar, all still very, 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 very high level guys. They're just not at the top and as close to a title shot right now. And then, so that's all I've got for Cory Sandhagen versus TJ Dillashaw. Aha, psych, I lied. One more thing. And also that was very cringy what I just said. I'm never doing that again, especially on a podcast that's being posted on social media. But the last thing I want to add is this is an obvious Fight of the Year contender. I think it is Fight of the Year. And I base that not solely off entertainment of the X's and O's and what exactly happened in this fight, but the pressure going into this, all the stakes that were on the line, the pressure. I mean, it was the feeling you got during this fight is why it's Fight of the Year. It's not as much crazy excitement as some other fights, but just the feeling that you get of watching two guys. They're going to fight for a title fight. You've got fan favorite you've got fan favorite Cory Sandhagen. Not fan favorite at all TJ Dillashaw, but he's a returning champion, and he's been out for 2.5 years. You take everything that was surrounding this fight and then throw that type of performance at it. It's a Fight of the Year contender, and the only thing that would have made this fight better is a full-packed arena, and I mean, that would have been an absolutely electric, atmosphere. I wish that would have happened. It's a shame it didn't, but it's all right. It happens. I would have loved to see this in a full arena on a pay-per-view, 5-round non-title fight. I think it was that high level of a fight. That's just something I would have liked to see, and I think that would have made this the best fight. Throw it at you. They were looking for a main event, or they were looking to make that UFC 265 card better. Even if you don't throw the title fight heavyweight main event on there, you let Amanda Nunes headline with TJ Dillashaw and Cory Sandhagen as the co-main. I think that would have been a very good card, and then you don't have to go through all the drama that we're going through with the UFC heavyweight division right now. I think that would have been a good thing to do, but hindsight's 50-50. This fight could have laid an egg. It could have been one of those fights, and then that card would have looked even worse. But, we got the fight we got, and I'm happy with it, so we'll just leave it at that. In the co-main event, we had Kyler Phillips versus Rolina Pavia, and I don't have much to say for this fight other than it's ridiculous that the first round wasn't scored at 10-8 for Kyler Phillips. This fight should have been a draw. It felt like a draw. Phillips won the second round by a mile. Pavia, won the last 2 rounds by not a close margin, a little bit more than a close margin, but that wasn't enough to be like, if you're feeling out the feel of this fight, it wasn't enough for those 2 rounds to outweigh the 1 round we saw from Phillips. And I'm not out on Phillips. Kyler Phillips is still such an exciting guy in this bantamweight division. And now the bantamweight division just got even stronger with Raulina in that division as well. And I'm very excited to see what's going on in the future for the bantamweights. I think that Kyler Phillips is probably going to fall out of the rankings. Maybe he doesn't. I think he stays right around the 15. He's probably going to go in that category of really good fighters who aren't ranked right now in bantamweight. Sean O'Malley's in that category right now. That's an interesting matchup going forward. Sean O'Malley versus Kyler Phillips. Song Yadong's in that conversation. There's a lot of guys in that 135-pound division who aren't ranked, who are very, very good. Umar Nurmagomedov, Adrian Yanez. All these guys are at different levels in their career right now, but 135 is just so deep in terms of talent and guys who are ready right now. Ricky Simone even. I mean, my goodness, this division is great. And, it's gotten to the point where 135, 145, 155, you've almost got 2 separate tier of fighter where you've got the ranked fighters, then you've got the guys who aren't ranked, but good Lord, they're good. So Kyler Phillips lands into that category, and I'll tell you what, I'm not missing another Kyler Phillips fight after the one I just watched. It's like, good Lord, that's some high-level entertainment is a Kyler Phillips fight. So, moving on, we had Darren Elkins versus Derek Minor. Derek Minner. This fight, it's just about every other Darren Elkins fight you've seen in the last couple years. It's everything that you expected. Elkins wears his opponent down, just rope-a-doping, not getting finished, and then all of a sudden you're getting finished. It's just the most classic Darren Elkins fight. Darren Elkins and Derek Minner are both 2 of those guys in that 145-pound division where you look at them and go, wow, they're talented. But neither of them, both talented for 2 very different reasons. But you look at them and you're like, hey, they're 2 really talented guys, and they ain't even close to those rankings right now. It's just how it works in that division. Then women's flyweight, I think this was the worst decision on the whole fight card. Macy Barber beating Miranda Maverick 3 rounds to 2. I don't know how you score the fight. I don't know how you score the second round for Macy Barber. It's just that when you look at that second round, this is a 50-50 round. With a minute left, maybe a minute 30, I'm looking at this going, oh, I have no clue how this is going to get scored. And then Maverick gets a takedown and wins the remainder of the round. And then it's like, okay, now that she got a takedown and a minute of control, it takes a 50-50 round and puts it into her favor. That's what I saw. I think that's what the majority of people on the internet saw. I think that's what the majority of people who were watching live and over the TV, I think that's what everybody saw except for 2 octagon side judges. And it's a shame because Miranda Maverick and Macy Barber, it really hurts both their careers at the end of the day. Macy Barber is going to get looked at lesser because, losing a close fight is one thing, but getting a win and then, you have to deal with people calling it a loss. People are saying you're not as good as your ranking because of that decision. Miranda Maverick doesn't get to move up in the rankings because she technically lost. This is just, it's a shitty situation that, you don't want to have to deal with, but it happened. So, what's next for both these fighters? Macy Barber called out Jessica I just don't see it right now. I think that's a little bit too high. Moving from 13 to 8 after, probably losing the fight to the number 14 ranked fighter just doesn't make sense to me. Should she move up in the rankings? Yes. whether that's Andrea Lee or Talia Santos. I think both those are possibilities. But you also have, Miranda Maverick, who needs to move up in the rankings as well, because she put on an impressive performance, and giving her an unranked fighter wouldn't be fair to her either. So we're at a point where Maverick and Barber are both going to need ranked opponents in their next fight. Probably wait for a couple other fights to clear out. Roxanne Modafferi is supposed to fight Tatiana Suarez. That fight happened. That could open up something. Grasso and Lee, those are two. You could do Maverick and Grasso, Lee and Barber. That's an option. I'm not too bullish on any. There isn't anything that sticks out to me for either of those fighters and go, all right, there it is. It's not like Cory Sandhagen where it's like, I really like Rob Font. I don't see anything that sticks out to me as a great matchup or anything that really helps either of those two fighters. And then the fight that I was most excited for, that I had the co-main feeling for, even though it wasn't the co-main, was Adrian Yanez versus Randy Costa. And if you're active on Twitter at all, you know why. And if you're not active on Twitter, then you were probably listening to me say that. You were watching the broadcast and you're going, what the hell are all these people talking about Twitter and Yanez and Costa? At the end of the day, Adrian Yanez is one of the best prospects in the bantamweight division. Randy Costa also, come to find out, is one of the best prospects in the bantamweight division, because you don't do that to Adrian Yanez without being high level yourself. But these two promoted a fight on Twitter that moved its way up the card. This fight wasn't supposed to happen. These two organized the fight. They said, hey, we want to fight each other. The UFC said, hey, okay. Then they said, hey, this date, some things moved around with the date. Eventually, it landed on this date. The UFC was like, okay. And then, they said, all right, you're a prelim fight. And then Dauskas and Shamil got moved to next week. And they said, all right, you're not a prelim fight no more. You're a main card fight. So that just goes to show the power of promotion when fighters and fans and the UFC are all on the same page. You get fights like Yanez and Costa. You don't get them every week, but when it pans out very well. And the fight itself lived up to every expectation that Yanez and Costa set for this. And Adrian Yanez is a tremendous fighter. I mean, he went out there and he said it himself. He got beat. He got outclassed in the first round by Randy Costa. Randy Costa came out with a great game plan, pressure, jab, that really limited some of the things that Yanez could do. Then Yanez started coming back and being like, all right, you want to throw jabs? We can throw jabs. Yanez started connecting with his own jab, started mixing some body shots, and eventually he landed a big body shot, backed it up with another big body shot, just started finding the liver of Randy Costa. And then when you find the liver, that opens up, that it kind of just shuts down the body, opening up a lane to a finish. And when you give Adrian Yanez a lane to a finish, he's going to take it. He's going to take that lane. He's going to take it at 100 miles an hour, and he's going to get that finish. And that's exactly what happened. This is a fight where Costa wins the first round. Yanez makes adjustments to his game plan, and then eventually wins the fight. That is something that I love seeing from someone who isn't even ranked yet. It's like we saw from TJ Dillashaw some adjustments in his game plan, and those adjustments received some very high praise, and he's one of the best fighters in the world. Now we have Adrian Yanez pretty much did the same thing. Found an adjustment, found a different angle to approach this fight, gets the win after losing the first round. He really did very similar things to TJ Dillashaw in that sense, and he's an unranked guy. And I think that both Yanez and Costa are both going to get pushed up these rankings because they're both incredibly talented guys who talk well, who promote themselves well, and are just simply likable dudes. Costa and Yanez are about as likable as it gets. And then they go in there and they put on great fights like this fight. These two are going to move up fight cards. They're going to make a name for themselves. And eventually, they're probably going to... I think that both Costa and Yanez are going to be ranked eventually. And Yanez probably a little quicker just because he seems to be on more of a rocket ship. But don't overlook Randy Costa just because he lost this fight. I'm very excited for these guys. It's as simple as that. I hope they both get another fight in before the end of the year, and I hope they both get wins. I loved watching this fight. I loved watching this build up, and this is one of the few times where I genuinely really hope that these guys have tremendous careers. Obviously, I don't wish ill on anyone, but I feel like these two have just made a special impact and made a really special build-up for this fight, and I really just hope these two guys the absolute best for the rest of their career. That was tremendous all the way around. Thank you to Yanez and Costa for a great fight. It's really all I can say. They have my praises. And then the premier prelim fight was Soriano versus Allen, and that fight was also another tremendous fight. I mean, we're just getting, at this point, this fight card was just tremendous. Halfway through this fight card, I was like, this is getting ridiculous. I'm having too much fun. And we hadn't even seen Dillashaw and Sandhagen in the octagon yet. That was largely due to Allen, Soriano, Yanez, Costa, Phillips. It was tremendous. And this was just another fight that was great. And I don't know how Brendan Allen became such a great striker over, this short span of time. But to go in there with Soriano and outstrike him in many aspects, his body kicks are crazy. I mean, you're looking at a cardio workhorse just getting beat down and slowed down because of some massive body kicks. Very impressive from Brendan Allen. And for Soriano, I mean, he landed his shots. I mean, the chin on Allen is, I could sit here and punch this wall behind me for 15 minutes, and I'd have a better chance of knocking it out than if I punched Brendan Allen for 15 minutes, if he was just standing there. I mean, the chin on him is ridiculous. Soriano was landing some massive shots. He was eating them. By the time Soriano connected with a massive shot, before he had his hands back, Brendan Allen was returning, with the massive body kick, or he was countering. Tremendous fight. I love this fight. And Brendan Allen, I think, is on the cusp of rankings at 185 pounds. I don't know if he's there yet, but he is close. Very, very close. Andre Muniz at 185 is a very interesting guy in that division that I think would be a good matchup for Brendan Allen. But if not, something just outside the top 15, and then that will propel him to the top in his next fight. For Soriano, he doesn't have much further to go either. Just because he came out on the wrong end of this one doesn't mean I'm any lower on him as a fighter, because I still really like him. He's had some great performances. That was only his first loss, only his 9th pro fight. He's still got some learning to do. I think he's going to be in the UFC for a very long time, and I think he's going to be ranked in the UFC as well. And then the last fight we're going to talk about is Mickey Gall versus Jordan Williams. Mickey Gall, this is going to be a quick one. Also, when did you get so good at striking? Great performance by Mickey Gall, and he's really starting to get himself a career here. Mickey Gall used to be the guy who fought CM Punk, but now he's becoming someone who could make a push for the rankings if he continues to improve and he continues to, if he continues to fight at this level. I'm not saying he will, but I'm saying he can. That's the key here. He can, make a run at the rankings. And that's something that I think most people would have disagreed with even a couple months ago. So that's all I had for UFC Fight Night Cory Sandhagen versus TJ Dillashaw. We're going to move on. There isn't any other news to talk about, nothing else to touch on in that section. We're going to jump right into this week's fight card coming up, and that is headlined by Uriah Hall and Sean Strickland. Now, let me get this out of the way. This isn't the most excited I've ever been for a fight card. It happens. It happens. Now, taking it right from the top, Uriah Hall versus Sean Strickland, not the best main event, but it's a serviceable main event for a fight night, and I'm not going to pretend like this is the reason Uriah Hall versus Sean Strickland isn't the reason I'm low on this card. But I really, if you're looking at just this fight, I really like this fight. I think this was a really good matchup for Sean Strickland and Uriah Hall. Uriah Hall is someone who is starting to turn it around. He was one of the best prospects in the UFC. Now he's someone who is finally in the rankings. He's a little bit older, and he's trying to make a run at the top at 185, and I think he has a chance to do it. Sean Strickland, I think he's got a chance to do that same thing as well. Both these guys, great strikers, two very different approaches to striking. Sean Strickland wants to go in there and get into a fist fight. Uriah Hall is a martial artist. We're going to get a chance to see here, Sean Strickland's going to try and make this a brawl. Uriah Hall's going to try and avoid that. Uriah Hall's going to try and pick him apart from the outside. Sean Strickland's going to bring pressure. My prediction for this fight is I think that Sean Strickland is going to win this. I just think that he's going to get into the face of Uriah Hall and make him fight, and I think he's going to be very aggressive, and I think he's going to see some rewards with that, especially in the smaller octagon. So I've got Sean Strickland with probably I could see a KO. I could also see a decision. Lean in decision right now. Maybe I'll switch it to a KO pick by the end of the week. But right now, I'm saying decision. But by no means can Ryan Hall not put Sean Strickland's lights out. That's a very possible outcome. But right now, I just think the X's and O's. I like the brawler in this situation. The co-main, Shamil Abu Rakadikov versus Chris Dauskas. Much easier to say. And my apologies to Shamil because I butcher his name. I've been butchering his name for the last 3 weeks because for some reason I've had to talk about Shamil every week for the last 3 weeks. My apologies, I can't get your last name right. It's amateur hour. My bad. Okay, but this fight is really interesting. Shamil has been off for a long time. I will look to see when his last fight was. It's been a minute. I can tell you that for sure. Chris Dauskas, not so much. Chris Dauskas has been moving up. Shamil's last fight was in 2019, September. Lost to Curtis Blades via KO. It happens. Most heavyweights get knocked out by Curtis Blades. But I've got Chris Dauskas in this one. I just really liked what I've seen from Chris Dauskas the last couple times out, and I'm going to be riding that one. And then right here is where I start to go. This card, come on. Cheyenne Buys versus Glorina De Paula. I remember not too long ago when Cheyenne Buys was like the opener to the prelims, or she was on the early prelims. Now she's the third fight on a fight night card. That's, this card's just shallow. It's not very deep. I mean, there isn't much else to say for that. But there are some really interesting names here. I'm not going to talk in depth about the rest of these fights. Simply because, I'm going to be honest, I don't know the X's and O's of these fighters well enough to give you a prediction and thoughts. And anyone who can do that is probably giving you a line of BS, or they're an elite when it comes to knowledge on the sport. I think I'm very good when it comes to knowledge on the sport, but there's a top 1% out there that could give you a breakdown of every single fight. I'm just going to talk about the names I like on this. Ronnie Yanha, always a fun guy to watch if you like watching BJJ Specialist. Sam Alvey, some people hate him, some people love him. If you like MMA TikToks, you probably love Sam Alvey. Very active on TikTok, and he's become a fan favorite as of late. However, he has lost a lot as of late. So if Sam Alvey can win this, he'll probably be able to stay in the UFC. If not, he might get cut. So, hopefully Sam Alvey performs well and stays in the UFC. Not much more to say. On the prelims, we have Mounir Lazzez, who is a prospect that I am very, very high on. I really like Mounir Lazzez, and he's a fun fighter to watch. He got beat by Warlley Alvarez in his last fight, but you know what? The Warlley Alvarez that we saw in that fight was a wild man, and, looked unbeatable if you aren't a top-tier guy, the Warlley Alvarez we saw Mounir Lazzez fight. That Warlley Alvarez doesn't always show up, but when it shows up, he's a tough guy to beat. Mounir Lazzez fought Warlley on the wrong night. I think he's going to turn it around this time. Then we've got Nico Montano, who used to be the female 100. She was the champ at 135, the very first champ at 135. She's 5-3 in MMA. Take that at what you will, but we have a foreign champ fighting on the prelims. Trevin Jones, Philip Rowe, two very interesting prospects on this card. Those are two names that aren't too bad. But other than that, this is pretty much the card of the unknowns. And, with the prelims that we had today, last week, I didn't talk about all of them today, but those prelims last week were very good. Ian Heinich, Nazardir Imavov, Mickey Gall, Jordan Williams, Julio Arce, Andre Ewell, Sijara Eubanks, some very some well-known names. And, this week just didn't turn out the same. It happens. You can't, have them all perfect. But I'm not telling you not to watch it. Still watch this. Because next time this happens and you see the name, say Danny Chavez, you'll know a lot more about him as a fighter. Or Jean Yu Frey. You'll know a lot more about her as a fighter. And maybe you'll find a new prospect that you like. And you'll know next time the prelims roll around. And that's what I'll be doing. And I suggest that everyone else does that. We are just 2 weeks out. On a high note, we are 2 weeks out from UFC 265. Derek Lewis versus Cyril Gane for the heavyweight title. And Juliana Pena and Amanda Nunes for the female 135 belt. On those prelims, there are a lot more fighters that we know. Manel Cape, Carolina Colcheches, just call her Carolina. Draco Rodriguez, Jamie Simmons, Manel Cape, Ode Osborne, Angela Hill, Bobby Green, Rafael Fiziev, Alonzo Menafield, Tisha Torres. Those prelims, I like the looks of that so far. Main card also looks very well with Jose Aldo, Pedro Munoz, Michael Chiesa, Vicente Luque, Song Yadong, Casey Kenny. Those are some really fun names. That should be a very fun card. I think it's just one fight away from being an elite pay-per-view, but it happens. It's still going to be a very good pay-per-view. And I will be talking about it next week on the 38th episode of the Head Kick KO podcast. This was the 37th episode. We are starting to get up there in episodes. So, if you're still watching, make sure to like and subscribe, because if you've made it roughly 40 minutes into this podcast with a random dude talking about MMA in an Allen Iverson jersey when he's worn a jersey 3 weeks in a row on his podcast, if you are still watching, you probably like the content. So you might as well might as well subscribe. Don't ask this every week, but, this week, hey, help a brother out. Like, subscribe. Don't forget to come back next week, because next week we're going to be doing that preview for UFC 265 or 265, yes. And we'll be talking about any other news that happened in the UFC. I imagine that this is going to be a news week. We didn't get very much this week, So usually when you've got 1 week of very little news, usually the next week will be a lot of news. So look out for that. And I'll also be talking about Uriah Hall versus Sean Strickland and any other fights that I really liked on that card. Probably not very many, but if I do like some, I'll talk about them. And that's all I have for this episode. So make sure you tune in next week. And once again, thank you for watching this episode of the Head Kick KO podcast.